Okay, welcome back, everybody. In our last lecture, we talked about Harold Innis and the bias of communication and how the different types of communication influence social systems, empires, cultures, things like that. Today, we're going to focus, or right now, we're going to focus on from civilizational institutions to human consciousness itself. Walter Ong, it builds on Innis and Marshall McLuhan, but he argued that orality and literacy aren't just different ways of communicating. Okay, they're different ways of thinking. So this lecture explores it talks about primarily orality and the transformations brought by literacy and the continuing blend in our digital age of something called secondary orality. I'm going to draw on a book. It's entitled Synthesizing the Orality Debate, and connect some of those principles in that book to Ong's claim that we encounter daily. And so we're going to talk about some examples from Homer, TikTok, audiobooks. And so by the end of the lecture, I want you to be able to, one, distinguish between orality, literacy, and secondary orality, and two, explain Ong's claim that writing restructures consciousness. AI does the same thing. We'll get there probably in class, but analyze case studies across different cultures and be able to apply those insights professionally. So that's where we're at. All right, big idea number one. Walter Ong defines primary orality as the condition of cultures with no knowledge of writing. In such societies, knowledge is stored in memory and transmitted through performance. Speech is eventful. It happens in time, between bodies, and places of ritual and community. To survive, oral cultures rely on mnemonic devices, rhythm, repetition, formulaic phrases, and narrative clusters. In Homer, you probably, in high school, maybe you heard phrases like rosy-fingered dawn, swift-footed Achilles. They aren't just literary flourishes, but they're memory aids. They just sound great, right? Oral thought favors additive structures, and, okay? Situational reasonings and concrete examples. So, let me say that one more time, because I think I said it right. Oral thought favors additive structures. This and that and that. And so we add things on and layered together. And that's what I mean by additive structures, okay? So truth is confirmed by memory, performance, rather than by reference in detached texts. In primary orality, forgetting equals cultural death. People remember. Communities guard memory by continuous reenactments in festivals, storytelling, and ritual. Ong emphasized that oral knowledge is alive, embodied, and rational. I'm going to give, I may have you guys watch a 50-minute long, it's a really old 1970s, early 80s BBC documentary on what life was like before the printing press and after the printing press. It's actually really good and kind of fun to watch. At least I think so, but I'm a dork, so it's really cool. But it goes into all those different nuances between oral and literate. Okay. Big idea number two: the coming of literacy. So writing externalizes memory. Duh, right? Marks on clay, parchment, or paper allow us to keep knowledge in a location outside the human body. This changes not only communication, but it changes how we think and how we interact with our world. It changes our cognition. So literacy, the ability to read, enables abstraction, categorization, and analytic reasoning. It separates the knower from the known. They're not the same thing anymore. The subject from the object. It allows solitary reflection. I can read something and think about it. I don't have to interact with someone. And silent reading. Various scholars have linked literacy to lists, contracts, and the scientific method. In his work on the alphabet, Eric Havelock argue that Greek alphabet transformed thought by encouraging analysis rather than mythic performance. Ong, the guy we're talking about right now, argue that writing restructures consciousness itself. Humans begin to think like text or think in texts. We outline, we categorize, we treat ideas and objects that can be as we treat ideas as objects that can be arranged and revised. So literacy doesn't just erase orality, it overlays it with something else. A literate person still speaks, but thought itself becomes shaped by the texts that is going through your brain. Lots of people have talked about that. There's still some controversy around it, but that's kind of the idea there. Okay, big idea number 3. Different scholars have different approaches on the extent of the transformation between oral and literate cultures. Say how big was the impact, what does it look like, things like that. Some people argue that literacy means just merely layers onto oral habits. Others, like Walter Ong, argue that literacy rewrites how we actually think. It restructures our brain, the synapses in our brain, those sorts of things. There's a chapter in his book called Synthesizing the Orality Debate, but it kind of shows both sides of the argument here. The layering theorists, people say it's just layered, stress that even literate cultures depend on oral conversations, charisma, and dialogue. The other side, the rewiring side, right, stresses that literacy fosters abstraction, bureaucracy, and new mental habits. Okay, so there's kind of an argument there. Whether it's one or the other, we do know for sure that literacy transforms some aspects of consciousness while leaving some elements of oral thought dynamic and still alive. In classrooms today, we see this tension. Students are sometimes fluent in these digital or oral genres, TikTok, memes, podcasts, things like that. So if you're really deep into that, those students may have some trouble sometimes with sustained textual arguments or getting to a text or reading a text, things like that. Other people that are really have read a whole lot, that sort of thing, are trained in textual literacy, and they may struggle to present ideas orally with charisma and with confidence. Okay, a healthy education cultivates both sides, both the oral and the illiterate modes of thinking. Okay, number 4, the alphabet, and we'll talk about how the alphabet changed all of this a little bit. So the alphabet is essentially a powerful form of literacy. Segmenting sound to small sets of symbols enables an efficient way to learn and use writing. Okay, Marshall McLuhan argued that the alphabet fostered linear sequential thought. Again, Eric Havlik said that the Greek philosophers, the Greeks were able to invent philosophy and made democracy possible because of the alphabet. This is called the alphabet effect, in that it demonstrates not all literacies are equal. Different scripts, pictographic, symbolic, syllabic, syllables, that word, and alphabetic influence cognition differently. Alphabetic literacy, it was not only space-based, like we were talking about before, it's portable like papyrus, but also cognitively transformative. It fostered abstract reasoning, law, philosophy, and science. Innes's framework helps us see material bias. Ong helps us see the mental structuring of that. That makes sense? So our last lecture, we talked about the material that the technology is in, and how that influences the social system. Now we're talking about the mental restructuring, what it does to our brains. Okay. All right, so I want to talk about a big idea number 5, and that is the secondary orality in the digital age. Walter Ong coined this term secondary orality to describe orality reborn in electronic environments. He originally was talking about television and said that television is more of an oral medium because you don't interact with it, you don't read it, you just watch it and it tells you stories. Okay, so he's saying that we're kind of reverting back to this oral culture. And other examples of this are radio, of course, television, the internet, podcasting, things like that, oral stories. They revive these oral features: immediacy, performance, participation, and interaction, at least mentally. I think Marshall McLuhan called this a hot medium versus a cold medium. Television, and if your brain engages and turns on when you are watching it or communicating with it, then it's a hot medium. If not, it's a cold medium. If it just tells you things and you don't have to engage your brain that way. Okay? Oral technologies tend to be more hot. The more literate technologies tend to be a little cooler. That's not always the case. You could read a story, get into it, and your brain could really, activate. But that's kind of the basic concept there. Podcast place voices in our ears during our daily routines. I walk into work sometimes, listen to my AI daily brief as I walk in, and can think about that and try to, when I get to my office sometimes on Mondays and Wednesdays, I have some free time in the morning. I try to apply some of the principles, do some coding, work on some agents, do that sort of thing. It's kind of fun. I'm not very good at it though. Other things, live streaming recreates communal gatherings. TikTok relies on gesture, rhythm, call and response. There's the TikTok chains that go on. You probably know more about that than I do. Kind of cool. We may show some of those in class. I don't know. Even with all of that, secondary orality is still layered on literacy in the digital infrastructure. Podcasts are scripted, live streams are archived, TikTok relies on meta data and algorithms. Even things like reality television are all scripted, all of it. Okay, so thus secondary orality combines space, time, immediacy, and reach with time, bias, archived performance. It demonstrates that orality and literacy are not separate stages, but interacting ecologies. They play on each other. Okay? So professionals must design both oral immediacy and literate depth in order to make meaning. Okay, so summary. Ong extends Innes's insights by showing how media reshape not only institutions but minds. Orality emphasizes memory, rhythm, and embodiment. Literacy extends thought, fostering abstraction and analysis. The alphabet accelerated this restructuring, while digital performance revives oral patterns in new ways. Here's the key takeaway. Communication technologies don't just transmit ideas, they change how we think, remember, and relate. In our digital era, we must be bilingual in both orality and literacy. We want to design practices that use the strengths of each. That's it. Thank you for listening, and make sure to do the learning checks, and we'll see you in class. Bye.